We spoke to Admiral Daryl Caudle. He's the Chief of Naval Operations about the state of the alliance. He's America's highest-ranking naval officer, and he says he's not worried. Is NATO where it needs to be at this time for you to be able to have those conversations and make that a reality? Are you concerned about the viability of that alliance?
I'm not concerned with it. I just had them all here for INR. Just had a Five Eyes luncheon. Then I had a broad group with a lot of other NATO partners. They're committed. They understand it. There's sometimes a political level and a mill-to-mill level, but the Navy-to-Navy is rock solid. We understand exactly what we need to do to work well together as an alliance, and I don't have any concern with that. This idea of shifting more responsibility to them, I think they welcome it. I think it's needed. It gives me more options with my Navy to do things only things that I can do, Christina. There's only certain things that the United States Navy can do, because of our capability mismatch, even over our alliances. And I need to be able to have the options and the degrees of freedom to apply my force to the problem sets. If I'm spending a lot of time doing things that other nations could actually quite do just as well as me, then that's the way we grow together to accomplish the things we need to do as allies and partners.
Let me ask you about one of those capabilities, because in 2006, the Navy decommissioned a bunch of aging Avenger-class minesweepers and kind of shifted a lot of that capacity over to NATO, which sounds like it works until NATO doesn't want to get involved in a conflict, which is what we saw in Iran. So how are you addressing that? How do you compensate for that lack of capability?
Well, one of the most challenging things you can do, and this is why it's so effective, is counter-mine warfare. Actually, doing mine warfare and getting rid of mines in a contested environment, it's hard to do. Because
why is it so hard? It does seem like it's... From a layperson's perspective, it does seem like it's harder than I would assume.
Yeah, well, even in the Strait of Hormuz, which, in some places maybe like 7 miles across, 7 miles of ocean, and you put these things on the bottom, tethered to the bottom, without some exquisite intelligence, you're not sure exactly where they are. Trying to find that's a bit of a needle in a haystack, even for our capabilities. And so, we have some exquisite autonomous kit that goes and does that. These traditional Avenger class had a way to do that. We've had some helicopter, capabilities that do that through pulling, some detection system through the water. And then, but we're really going more toward unmanned capability to find and neutralize mines. And so I think that's another piece that's going to have a huge knee in the curve as we evolve these unmanned capabilities. And I'll also be able to do that better in a contested environment, because I don't have to have a manned platform in the battle space, in the actual weapon engagement zone, while I am demining if I have unmanned undersea vehicles doing it. And so that's where we need to get to.
I want to ask you a really stupid question. How real is that threat? Because we've been covering this conflict, especially given that we're Bloomberg, day in, day out, shipping, tracking it. We hear over and over again about these mines. I can't think of a single incident of one going off, striking a ship. Is there any chance that they're not there?
There's no chance they're not there. Okay.
Do you have any kind of idea of the scope?
I do. And, some of that gets into some classified intelligence, so I won't go into how we know and the numbers, but I can tell you mines are there. I can tell you that most of that is really shaping operations for the Iranians. The goal there is to force shipping into their side of the actual Strait of Hormuz. Yeah. That's their goal, because they have this vision that one day they'll charge to transit an international strait. As well as I do, that's a red line, not just for the United States, for any country. We do not pay to go through international straits. And so that's something they aspire, and that's a sticky point in the negotiation. But that's the idea of their mining effort there.
As we watch conflicts elsewhere, especially the war in Ukraine and the kind of asymmetric warfare they've been able to do with these cheap drones, is the Navy where it needs to be on autonomous weapons, on drone warfare, on doing exactly what you just said, smaller, cheaper ways to combat some of these threats without having to fire, a Patriot or a THAAD every time you need to take something out?
No, we're not. We're not where I want to be. We're in a place where we are growing quickly there. I get this question quite a bit, and for me, I have to think about not only the autonomy I can build, which I can spend money on that and go do that, but I have to have a sound deployment model. See, unlike launching autonomy from land like Ukraine's use case, I have to do that by carrying that across the ocean. So if I carry that across, a large Pacific Ocean, I've got to have the motherships, if you will, ready with that type of autonomy in it to actually utilize that effectively. Because I'm not launching that from land. So this concept of how I deploy with that kit is something we're working very heavily on. So we're investing in, and it's also we're a bit stovepipe currently by domain. So we're strong with.
What do you mean by that?
So we are very good with unmanned undersea vehicles. We've been doing, I'm a submarine officer, been doing that forever, okay? We're really good at unmanned aerial vehicles. We've been flying drones around forever. And we're now coming into our own on what we call medium unmanned surface vehicles that can carry containerized payloads. It could be missile systems. It could be, sonar systems. It could be deception capabilities, all these things. We're probably more behind there. And these are ships that are about 120 feet long, but they're completely autonomous. We're going to deploy with one of those with the Theodore Roosevelt Strike Group here soon. And
is this the first one?
The first one that's going with a complete unmanned surface vehicle. But more importantly is how we package unmanned to actually go complete a full mission is what I'm trying to do. So we're not just in our respective domains, but we package this like we do in the Joint Force to solve a real mission problem.
What is the biggest national security threat for America?
Well, that's it varies based on how I kind of answer that question. But, one of the reasons we have a strong sea-based nuclear deterrent is, of course, strategic, threats from Russia or China or anyone else who has a nuclear weapon. We have a machine here in the United States that relies on continuity of government, continuity of operations, continuity of decision making. That falls apart if you're under strategic attack. And so the way only way you can really prevent that currently is through a strong deterrent force. And that's why, our USS District of Columbia replacement submarine for Ohio is so vital that we keep that on time and on track. So that's, from a physical destruction and damage to our way of life here, of course. But, but cyber is, we've seen things done in cyberspace that are significant. Space is a place that I'm more and more concerned with. And then as a Navy, I'm always concerned that anything that stops the flow of commerce, anything that's in the sea lanes of communication.
You consider that a threat as well?
Undersea cables, right? 90% of our commerce still goes by sea. That's where the big super tankers are, carrying everything from Amazon we talked about earlier. And places like that, we have to keep those open, the choke points free, all these sea lanes open, and make sure our undersea infrastructure is protected.
I was reading a report by the U.S. Naval Institute that said Russia's presence in the Arctic was once superior, but its dulled military edge, partially due to the conflict in Ukraine, is giving the U.S. and its NATO allies an opportunity to reframe Arctic strategy. That's going to require a lot of cooperation from NATO. But yes. Is that something that the U.S. needs to focus more on?
Yes, we have, I call it an Arctic blindness. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind. Nobody understands it. You're talking trillions of dollars of rare earth, natural gas, and oil in that region. And people are going to try to, lay claim to that. Russia wants us to basically stay out of that area. This northern sea route, which is opening more and more, each year, it gets a little more open. They want to control that, just like what we talked about. I could see them actually wanted to charge transiting that. It basically runs along their border side of the Arctic, but it's international, so that's never going to happen again. But it does take partnerships, Christina. I look at it kind of three ways if I could.
Yeah.
Number one, it's about presence. You have to be in the battle space because the environmental conditions there are tough. And so when you're above the Arctic Circle in the Arctic region, communication systems, temperature, weather, marginal ice zone, ice kills, all that, you got to know how to operate in that. Number two, that takes capabilities that the United States has. And we, need to work as a team of people in the Arctic Council, which are all NATO nations now, with the exception of Russia, extremely important. And that is the last part, is the partnerships there. We cannot be there all the time. So we need better data fusion, more integration, more domain awareness of what's going on there. And then at our timing and tempo, we decide to deploy our forces to actually help out. That's kind of the ideal state. I did just hold an event yesterday with a bunch of countries on this very topic. I think we're all on like-minded of what we need to do there. But going forward, the Arctic is going to only grow in importance.
Before I let you go, approximately 20% of the Navy is women. About the same for commissioned officers. About 40% of the Navy is comprised of members of ethnic or racial minority groups. Do you think women and naval officers of color have the same opportunity for advancement in the Navy as they did even 5-10 years ago?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is no question they do. They just, there's the strongest in my career structure for meritocracy there's ever been. I serve with so many incredible females. I serve with so many incredible minorities. And I think it's a great time to join the Navy, and there could not be more opportunity for all people who want to serve.
You don't have any concerns about when they look at some of these higher ranking individuals who've had their commissions removed or been knocked down and replaced with other individuals in the last year or so, about what that's going to mean to women and people of color as they think, well, maybe I can have a career in the Navy?
I do not. I think those that really look and understand, what they need to do to succeed in our armed forces are rising to the occasion every single day, and I could not be more proud of them.
All right, next 250 years. Where do you see the U.S. Navy? Do you think we're going to be around? And what do you think the Navy is going to be?
The Navy will only grow in importance over the next 250 years. We are never going to be away from the oceans. Most of the people live near the ocean. All of our commerce goes via the ocean. There's never going to be any magic beans that's going to change that in a long, long time. And so the Navy's got a long history here. Now, I can't predict what the technologies that'll be in place that'll be kind of helping us with the character of warfare, but the nature of warfare really never changes. And I don't think the next 250 years will be any different.
Admiral, thank you so much. As an Army brat, I think I'm legally required to say go Army, beat Navy, but it's still really nice to have you here.
You know that I'm required to say go Navy, beat Army.
Thank you, sir. Have a great day.
You're welcome. Thank
Appreciate
you, Christina.